Hi, my name is Josh Oliver. This video is going to be an overview of an application that me and the team built to play a game of Jeopardy with a twist. In this video, I will demo the app and share a few tips and tricks on how to create the UI and functionality needed for both the host and player of the game. I will show you the importance of URL parameters and other possibilities with embedding elements in a Zoho Creator app. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I hope you enjoy. So what we're looking at here is the Jeopardy homepage. We can think of this application as really just one page that manages the user's experience when accessing the app. Here we can see I haven't started a game, so I'm simply just looking at the game. And let me start by just giving you a quick demo of the game, and then I'll go into the tips and tricks and different features that I've added into the HTML and the page itself to make the UI and functionality work. Let's say I'm coming in and I want to start a game. So I could come in here and I go down to the little box here and I say I want to start a game. So I click Add New, and then I could go ahead and select the application that I want to play. Essentially, how this game works is we can choose different topics, and then once we choose a topic, a random list of questions will be created. I can associate players to the game, so I can put in as many players as I would like, and once they're added to the game, they will be able to click play on their end. Now, if I'm a host, I can click I am hosting, and then once I click I am hosting, I can see all of the games that I am hosting. In this case, I've already created a game, so here is that game here, and I selected I am hosting, so I can select that game. After selecting the game, I can click join, and that will bring me into the game board. So we can see a few things happened. Whenever I jumped into the game, the URL stayed the same, the base URL. We're still on that same game page, the play game page, but it's appended a URL parameter called session ID. Every user gets their own session ID when they are playing a game, and they could regenerate a new session if they come back at a later time. But that session ID is unique for every person. So the session ID gets associated to this page. Now that the session ID is there, I know that I'm hosting it. So it's telling the page, hey, this is the host that's viewing this page. We need to display the questions. And so that's what we can see here. We have a report here that is grouped by the category. Each of these cards is just the point value for that question. And so all these questions are actually saved inside of this all questions report. And then whenever we create a game, we are randomly selecting the questions that are associated to this application. So I selected projects, and so a list of questions have been associated to this game. Other things we can see on this page, so we have our questions that we can play from. We also have HTML elements at the top, such as the application name, the topic, which is projects, and then we can also see a scoreboard or a button to view the scoreboard. And then we can also click a button to launch a buzzer. The buzzer is the way for the player to say, hey, I know the answer, and every person who's logged in will have a separate access to the buzzer and will be able to select that buzzer whenever they know the answer. And so I can see when I launch the buzzer, if I click this, I'm the host, remember, so I get a room code, and I'm going to take this room code and I'm going to put it back into this form. So I clicked launch buzzer, that opens up this form, which associates that buzzer code to the game. Whenever someone logs in and they are playing this game, they're going to get access to that buzzer code. So I, as a host, I'm going to have two separate windows open. I'll have the questions, and then I'll also have the buzzer open so I can see who answered first. Now, the buzzer I'm using is not a Zoho product. This is simply just a developer-friendly cosmobuzz.net. And the reason why I chose it is because I can use URL parameters in this URL to associate the game room code, and I'll show you that in a later step. Because I have associated the room code to the game, I can do some cool stuff within Creator to actually pre-populate that game code for the user. Now let's say I want to play the game. So I am a player now. So what I'm looking at here is just the host view. But let's say I'm playing the game. A player would have a different view because not every player should be able to just select an item on the board. It should be the host who's controlling the screen and the questions. So let's say I'm a player. So I'm going to log into the application as a player. refresh my page. First thing you'll see is that there's a little element, embed element that does appear. So play the game, listen to the music, and then once that music is over, I can say I want to play the game. So I'm going to choose the game that I was associated to. In this case, it was Projects July 25th. I want to play that game, or I can start a new game, but in this case, I'm going to select that game to play, and I click join. Now again, I'm a player, the browser in green to denote I'm a player, and then the browser in purple is the host. So I'm the host in this page, and I'm a player in this page. Both the URLs look the same. I'm just in the play game page, and the session ID is populated. But in this case, this session ID relates to a session record that's not tagged as a host. So I know that when this page loads, it's going to load as a player. Also, we can see, because this session ID is linked to a game as well, other information gets populated, like the project's category is populated, the room code gets automatically populated as well, because that's simply just a URL parameter that I can throw into this embed. And all I have to do is just put in my name. So I just say my name, I click join, and now I have a buzzer that I can click to let the host know that I have the answer. As the host, I can see someone's joined the game. So I have now cards that are getting added to this buzzer. And that's the reason why I like Cosmo Buzz, is because it's very easy. I can just see when people come in, and then I can see the answer that they submit. All the player has to do is click buzz and maybe choose an answer. And then now I can see on this end, Josh was the first one to answer. Here's that answer. And I can go ahead and move forward with selecting the question. So let's say Josh selects, or someone selects a question. Funny thing happened on the way to the forum for 400. The question gets appeared and a list of answers. So this is all defined inside of the questions template that we are pulling from. I select who the player is that answers the question. So let's say Josh answers this question. He says A. I click submit. Oh no, that's incorrect. So I'm going to refresh my page. Someone else is going to answer it. They're going to say B. Let's say Greg says B. Very good. If I refresh my page, also we'll see that that question gets grayed out, or that question really just changes because the status on that question was updated to completed. Also, if I click on scoreboard, we'll see that Josh answered that question negatively, or did not answer correctly, and so he gets a negative score, while Greg answered it correctly and gets a positive score of 400. This report is also ordered based on the score value, so that's another standalone function we built to display the order of the players. And that's essentially the game. We have one real main page that the user is going to interact with, and the host is selecting the questions. As they read the questions, they open up the buzzer. Then contestants are able to buzz in and select the question or select the answer. At the end of the game, then we can view the scoreboard and see who won. So now let's dive into the back end and see some tricks on how we're able to make all of this work. And really, the most of this in this video, we'll talk about this homepage or this play game page and how it's set up and how we're using URL parameters to control the elements and the UI. So we'll hop into the back, and I simply just click edit this application while on this page. From there, I can click open page builder. The other way you can do it is just edit the application, scroll or click this little element at the top right, and then you can choose the page you want to edit, so play game in this case. And from here, I'm just going to open the page builder, and we can see there's really only one element in this page, and that's just an HTML snippet. You can't really read it very well because I have a green background on it, which you can apply using just this little color icon here. And then you can give the page itself a color. So I just have the colors assigned to be the same. We're not doing any PDFs or printing options, but you could enable those if you wanted. And then inside of these properties, we're also defining parameters. So we have game ID, session ID, and question ID. The main two I believe I use are session ID and question ID, but I'll show you how those get used and what they mean for the load of that page. So I'm going to edit this HTML snippet, And I'm not going to go over the details of any of the HTML or the CSS. I really just want to stick high level on how the page uses URL parameters and how you can use conditional statements. So in this, we can see up at the top here, these are just some hard-coded variables that I use later on, which is just brand colors and how we can basically theme the different background and elements of the page. So I have two different colors that I'm defining. Let me just get rid of that. And then I also have some CSS to style the report and some other elements on the page. I'm not going to go through this CSS here, but here we can see we're ending the HTML snippet and we're going to start Deluge. So here's the start of some just standard Deluge script. And the first thing I'm asking is the session ID populated? Was the session ID in this URL? Because whenever you create a page parameter, that now exists as a variable you can load on the page. So just by defining the session ID with you basically just do question mark and then your page parameter equals, that is the value of that variable. You could add additional page parameters and say, and game ID equals, and then you put in the game ID. This is the value of this variable. So just by assigning some text in a URL, we can assign a variable or a value to a variable that loads inside of this HTML. So now what my code is doing, line number 128 here, it's saying if session ID is not empty or session ID is not null, is not the string version of null. I think I did that for some other reason. So if the session ID is not populated, then let's find that session. So I'm using a fetch command. I'm looking in the select games form. So that's the game selector. And I'm basing it on ID equals session ID. So I can find the session, and then from the session, I can get the game. Game is just the ID, the session.game that's listed on the session record. So I have now the session and the game. Now I can check, am I the host of the game? If I'm the host, then I need to check if the question ID is provided. If the question ID is in the URL or is defined, first I need to clear out the question ID, and then I need to open the answer submission form. Whenever I select a question, that is going to put in another parameter called question ID. And when the question ID is selected, that then opens really just a pop-up, because we can see open URL and it's just a pop-up window. So if the question ID is provided, then we're going to open that up. We're also going to load the launch buzzer button, and we're going to load the scoreboard button. These are just HTML elements with some class names so I can style them, and the A tag HTML element is linking it to either the form, the buzzer code, so that I can input the buzzer code and link it to the game, or for the scoreboard, it's opening up another page, but if you do this ZC load in dialog, it actually opens it in a pop-up window. So it opens a page in a pop-up window with a parameter called game ID defined. So now game ID can control the scoreboard because I only want to see the score values for that given game. So this is a separate page with some other HTML and some conditional stuff going on in there, which I won't go into, but for the purposes of this call, you can see the value of page parameters just getting dynamically added to different elements. You can add parameters or URL parameters to forms, you can add them to pages, you can add them to reports as well, and all of those are used to either control the view or to pre-populate information on a record. In the case of pages and reports, it's to control the view, but in the case of a form, it's to pre-populate information. Other parts of this HTML include the app name, which is just hard-coded. We also have a variable, which is getting added here to show the application name in uppercase. And then down here, we can see this is a element that's embedded into the page, div class game report. And this is actually showing a list of the game questions. So the report is game questions v2, and the parameters I'm using to filter this list, because all this is just a report, and then I'm filtering this report by the game ID, and I'm saying I don't want to see the header, I don't want to see the footer, and the header color is going to be our brand color. And that's essentially it. Now with this parameter added to this report, it's filtering this report by the game ID, and it's only going to show me the games or the questions that are linked to this game. If I'm not a host, so this is all the stuff that's happening if I'm a host. It's not too much code. It's only 30 lines of code. If I am the host, then these are the 30 lines of code to display. Otherwise, if I am not a host, then it's actually even simpler. So if the user is not a host, then we want to show HTML to display buttons above and then an iframe of the buzzer below. So if I go back into what the user sees, or the player, they see our header, which is app name, category, scoreboard. But then below we have an iframe for the buzzer. And what's cool is for this buzzer, all it is simply an iframe, but the URL includes another URL parameter. In this case, it's just / and then you put in your buzzer code. That then pre-populates the URL to include the buzzer code. And so whenever as a player, when you're viewing this, you see the iframe with that URL, and the room code is pre-populated, and all you have to do is put in your name. And when you click join, now I've already closed out that buzzer, so that code doesn't exist anymore. If I wanted to create a new code, all I need to do is just launch buzzer, grab this code, paste it, and then as a player, all I need to do is refresh my page. Yep, you see the code, room code changed, and then I click join, and now I am part of the game. Let's hop back into that editor. And again, this is if a session is populated and the user is not a host. So that the session's populated and we are just the player, we only get to have access to this, which is only like 15 lines of code. Really not too much to get this to function for the player. Let's say the session is not populated. If all of this stuff is false, and that means the session ID is not populated, all we need to do is we're going to open up a page in a pop-up window, and I can define the window size, and I just match this to the size of the video. This is just a page, which within this page is actually a pop-up or an embed of a YouTube video. And so that opens up in a pop-up, and then at the back end of that pop-up, we can see an element is embedded. So first we're going to say select a game, and then underneath select a game, just text, we have a form. And we can see the form link name is just select game, and the header is false. We don't want to see the header. So we are just going to select a game, and that's going to be an embedded form in this page. On submit of that form is whenever the page is going to refresh with a session ID appended. So the select game is essentially the session, and when I create that record, the select game record, that is a session ID that I'll be able to use, which links the user to a game. And that's about it. So this page is about 200 lines of code, but you can see how only a few lines of code are running at a given time based on these parameters within the URL. And we're able to do conditional logic and so on with those parameters. Now, this is an example of a more complicated use case of this. You can also use URL parameters within pages to just control simple elements on a page. So I showed the example of an HTML snippet, but you could also use like a panel element. Let's say I want to display, it could be anything. Let's say we want to show the sum of the answer submissions, and we're trying to sum the score value for the selected records. And then we could say if game equals input.game ID. So instead of actually putting in a hard-coded value here, you could put in a page parameter, input.game ID, and that's going to filter this sum, in this case, by all of the points or score values associated to this game. That's one way to do it, is just by doing the input.game ID in this case. Another way to add page parameters is, in this case, this is just to sum a value or to display data, but I could also do it for actions. So let's say if I click on this element, then I want to open a page, play game, and I want the query parameter to be the game ID. So let's say game ID equals. Now, when we're doing query parameters, it's a little bit different than when we just display values. I don't know why Zoho does it like this, but sure, there's a reason. When you're adding a variable this way, you do $, and then brackets, and then you can put in your page parameter that you want to add. So in this case, it would be like, probably not a great example because they're both the same, but in this case, we're playing the game and it's just going to refresh using the same game ID. So what that would, let's make it more concrete. So we're going to do that. And then let's just say it's going to be the same window. Let's refresh my page so you can see what that looks like. Now there's no data up here because it's just 0. But if I click on this element, what you'll see is that there will be a page parameter passed in, or ID. Now ID was not actually defined. So let me show you what that looks like. So if I do and game ID equals, just like that, we will see the ID get passed in. You can see that ID did show up inside of this URL. I know that wasn't a great example, but the key is whenever you're using query parameters and you want to link to another element, you can do so by adding a URL parameter and doing the $, squiggly brackets to use that as a variable. I'm going to go ahead and remove this element. That is it. So I'm sure you have some questions. Put them in the comments below. I'll answer them all and continue on this example. It's a complicated app, and there's some other stuff on the back end that are controlling it. Like, I didn't go into it, but we have like our questions bank. So each question is linked to an application, and each question is linked to a category, and then we have a level and score value. And we also have choices. So for this case, we are analytics back to formula. We have a bunch of different questions in here. And when I create a game for this category or for this application, it just launches it with all the questions selected in here. All right, so that concludes today's video. We talked a lot about URL parameters, how you can use those for conditional logic within a page, how you can also use those to control UI and functionality of a given page, and then also I showed you some tips and tricks on embedded elements within that page. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I'll be sure to answer them. And then if you want to reach out to us, you can go to zenatta.com. Thanks for watching.